News of the Times. Pushed to her death. Murder on London Bridge. Welcome to News of the Times. London, 1871, and a woman lies crushed between the wheels of a brewer's dray on the bustling span of London Bridge. Her final words, "My husband pushed me." In this gripping case, we followed the tragic story of Ann Pettingell, a woman seeking support from the man who had abandoned her, only to meet a horrifying fate in one of the city's busiest thoroughfares. Was it an accident, as the accused acclaimed, or a calculated act masked in public confusion? As eyewitnesses speak of a deliberate shove, as the victim herself gives a haunting deathbed deposition, and as love letters turn to threats and courts debate between murder or manslaughter, a disturbing question remains. What does justice look like when the victim is a wife and the law still sees her as a man's possession? Join us for a chilling exploration of betrayal, power, and a woman's final attempt to be heard on the cold stone of London Bridge. Also in this episode, in our end of segment further particulars, a brawl, a pub, a broken cell, and a prisoner who insists he's the one being wronged. From the chaotic streets of Mitcham to a magistrate's stern warning, we explore the curious case of Joseph Charles Homer, a man whose battle with authority and alcohol ended not with enlightenment, but with a month's hard labour and a very bruised constable. So, pop the kettle on, fortify yourself with a biscuit or two, and prepare for a descent into the darker corners of Victorian justice. From a death on a London bridge to a drunken showdown in Mitcham, it's a journey through law, loss, and the occasional misplaced boot. Settle in and let the drama begin. Background. For this less familiar with the Victorian transportation system, a dray was a heavy flatbed cart, typically with no sides, pulled by one or more horses, and used to transport bulky goods like beer barrels, coal, and building materials. In Victorian Britain, drays were a common sight on city streets, especially in industrial areas and near breweries. They were the backbone of local freight transport long before lorries and vans, and their solid wheels and sheer weight made them both indispensable and dangerous. If you picture a beer wagon without the cheer, you're nearly there. Ann Pettingell was a 33-year-old woman who had endured years of abandonment and hardship in her troubled marriage, described in her own final words as unsupported and repeatedly deserted. Anne had sought out her estranged husband in desperation, attempting to secure financial help after months of being left to fend for herself. James Pettingell was around 32 to 35, and he was a cooper by trade and outwardly a respectable man. In practice, he was elusive, often vanishing from Anne's life. When tracked down in Lincolnshire, he was living openly with another woman. Letters read in court revealed a man who alternated between threats, callous offers of divorce, and a chilling declaration to stay a mile away or face the consequences. The tragedy unfolded in the late hours of the 30th of October 1871. Much of what we know comes not from a crime scene report, but from the harrowing testimony of those who witnessed the aftermath, and from Ann Pettingell herself, as she lay broken but conscious in a hospital bed. Her account, taken in the presence of legal officers at Guy's Hospital, was not just a statement, it was a dying deposition delivered under the full weight of law. She named her husband as her attacker. She described years of abandonment and fear, and she insisted, even as her body gave way, that he had pushed her to her death. Later, eyewitnesses would testify in court that they had seen the shove with their own eyes. Some said he lunged, others claimed both had fallen, and yet, amid the growing debate over accidental death versus intent, James Pettingell had already disappeared. Now, as the coroner opens the inquest and officials gather statements from doctors, constables and stunned onlookers, we return to the official record and to the voices that sought to uncover the truth behind one final, fatal push. From the Bucks Herald, the 20th of January 1872, the case of the wife's murder on London Bridge. On the 13th inst, Mr. Payne resumed an adjourned inquiry at Guy's Hospital respecting the circumstances attending the death of Mrs. Ann Pettingell, aged about 33, lately residing in Church Row, Horsley Down. Mr. Thomas Gore, solicitor and assistant clerk to the London Mayor at the Mansion House, said that in consequence of receiving a letter from the Guy's Hospital authorities, he went there at about 10 o'clock on the morning of the 11th of November 1871, and going into the accident ward, he was taken to the bedside of the deceased. He told her he was an assistant clerk at the Mansion House and asked whether she wished to make any statement respecting her injuries. The witness administered the usual statutory caution, and the deceased replied that she felt she was a dying woman and she felt sure she would never recover. Witness then said, "I will take your statement down in writing." She was then sworn and made the following statement. "My name is Ann Pettingell. I am married to James Pettingell. I don't know where he lives, but the last time I saw him, he was living in Lincolnshire. I was walking with the husband over London Bridge, and on the way across, he kept pushing me, and halfway over gave me a dreadful push, and I fell under the wheels of a brewer's dray. Some people came up, and I said, 'My husband did it. Pray keep him away.' My leg was crushed, and I was taken away in a cab. My husband had left me 6 times and has been living with a younger woman. Prior to the occurrence, I went down to Lincolnshire and I found him in bed with her. I knocked at the door and was refused admission at first, but after sleeping in an outhouse all night, I ultimately gained admission. This was on Thursday, and on Friday night he took me to Hull. I stayed with him until Saturday, when he wished me to cross by steamer from Hull to New Holland. But fearing his intentions, I refused. He then wished me to proceed by steamer to London, but fearing that he intended to throw me overboard, I refused, and I walked to London in preference when this happened. I went to Lincolnshire to apply to him for subsistence, as he had never contributed to my support since last July, since which time I have supported myself. I dreaded much coming by boat from Hull to London with him. He pushed me under the dray. He has now gone away, but where I do not know. The foregoing depositions were read to the deceased and duly signed by her. After some corroborative evidence had been given, The jury returned a verdict of manslaughter against James Pettingell, and the coroner then issued his warrant for the arrest of the accused. As Ann Pettingell lay dying, her words painted a harrowing picture of betrayal and violence. But she was not the only voice in this unfolding tragedy. When the coroner's inquiry resumed, more witnesses emerged, ordinary men who just happened to be passing over London Bridge that night. One saw a man deliberately shove a woman under the wheels of a brewer's dray, and another, sitting atop the very cart that crushed her, testified to the same. Even the dray driver, it was later revealed, had confirmed what others had seen. The push was no accident. Despite these mounting testimonies, the man responsible, James Pettingell, had vanished. He had given a false address at the scene and disappeared into the city, leaving investigators scrambling to locate him. Now, as the jury considered not just a death, but a pattern of abandonment, threat, and violent consequence, we return to the formal inquest, where a verdict of manslaughter is delivered and the hunt for a missing husband begins. From the Guernsey Star, the 18th of January 1872, the extraordinary case of a wife murder on London Bridge. On Saturday, Mr. Payne resumed an adjourned inquiry at Guy's Hospital respecting the circumstances attending the death of Mrs. Ann Pettingell, aged about 33, lately residing in Church Row, Hawley Down. Police Constable William Rupert, 711, City, said that on the day in question he saw a crowd of people collected on London Bridge, and upon going to the spot he saw the deceased lying on the ground, weeping bitterly. Seeing that she was dreadfully injured, he asked her if he should put her in a cab and take her to the hospital. She replied, "Oh dear, no, take me to my mother's house." The husband was present, and witness, hearing what the husband had thrown her under the dray, asked his name, when he replied, "Walter Pettingell, and I reside at 7 Manor Road, Bermondsey." Witness then made inquiries as to his whereabouts and failed to discover him. Mr. Henry Crouch, Rear Lane in the city, said that he saw the deceased and her husband passing over London Bridge. The female was first, the husband was a little behind and nearest the wall. Suddenly he gave her a violent push, and she reeled under the wheels of a passing dray, drawn by 2 horses. Her body skidded the wheels, and she was dragged some distance. Witness heard her scream loudly, and upon going to her, she said, "Oh, take me to my mother's." The coroner here asked whether the driver of the dray was present, and Mr. Squires, the coroner's officer, replied in the negative. It was stated that when the application was made to the Lord Mayor for a warrant for the arrest of the husband, the driver of the dray was present and swore that he saw the husband push the deceased deliberately under the wheels of the dray. Dr. Dixon gave evidence to the effect that the deceased, when she gave her depositions, was perfectly aware of her state and the obligations of an oath. William Mackey, 22, of Scott Street, Whitechapel, said that at the time of the occurrence he was sitting on the dray in company of the driver, and when on the bridge he saw a man push the deceased under the wheels. The police replied in answer to the coroner that in spite of their best endeavours they had failed to arrest the accused. The jury returned a verdict of manslaughter against James Pettingell, and the coroner then issued a warrant for the arrest of the accused. A case worthy of trial, but justice delayed. The death of Ann Pettingell was not dismissed as a mere domestic tragedy. Instead, it moved through the full machinery of justice. including the grand jury, which returned a true bill for murder, formally agreeing that James Pettingell should stand trial for the deliberate killing of his wife. The prosecution, led by Mr. Postponed on behalf of the Treasury, emphasised the seriousness of the charge and requested a delay. Their key witness, the driver of the brewer's dray, had fallen ill, and without his testimony describing the fatal push, the case could not proceed. The judge agreed, and the trial was postponed. The charge of murder remained, but as proceedings stalled and pressure mounted, it would become clear that the road from accusation to justice was anything but straightforward. From the Weekly Dispatch of London, the 4th of February 1872, the alleged murder of London Bridge. The grand jury have returned a true bill against James Pettingell for the murder of his wife by throwing her under the wheels of a dray that was passing over London Bridge. Mr. Postponed, who is instructed to prosecute on behalf of the Treasury, applied for a postponement of the trial to the next session on the grounds that the driver of the dray was too ill to be able to attend and give his evidence at the present time. The case was a very serious and peculiar one, and he considered it very important that this witness should be called in order that he might prove the sort of push the prisoner gave to the deceased which caused her to fall under the dray. Mr. Montague Williams, who appeared for the prisoner, opened the application for the postponement and said that it was a very serious thing for the prisoner to have the charge of wilful murder hanging over him. The deputy recorder said he thought the application was a responsible one, and he ordered the trial to be postponed to the next session. The trial begins. Accident or murder? More than 5 months after the incident on London Bridge, the case of James Pettingell finally reached the courtroom. With a charge of wilful murder, the prosecution, led by Mr. Postponed for the Treasury, laid out a chilling timeline: a bitter separation, withheld support, threatening letters, and a fatal confrontation on one of London's busiest bridges. The defence insisted it had all been a tragic accident, a slip, a fall, a crowded pavement. But with a dying wife's deposition, witnesses from the scene, and a husband who had vanished and resumed life with his mistress, the court now faced a grave decision. Was this a moment of misstep, or the deadly culmination of a long-held resentment? From the London Evening Standard, the 10th of April 1872, the alleged wife murder on London Bridge, before Baron Cleasby. James Pettingell, 32, Cooper, a respectable-looking man, was charged with the wilful murder of his wife, Ann Pettingell. Mr. Postponed and Mr. F. H. Lewis conducted the prosecution, instructed by the city solicitor, and the prisoner was defended by Mr. Montague Williams. The case has stood over for a considerable time in consequence of the illness of a material witness for the prosecution, and it was one of a rather extraordinary character. The prisoner and the deceased, who was a woman about the same age as the prisoner, had been married for several years, but they seemed to have lived very unhappily, and they at length separated, and there did not appear to be any doubt that considerable ill feeling was entertained by the prisoner toward the deceased woman, and that she was also angry with him on account of his not sending her money to support herself. The prisoner appeared to have taken up with another woman and was living with her at a place called Claythorpe in Yorkshire, and the deceased went down there to him, and after a short time the prisoner and the deceased appeared to have returned to London together. But there was no doubt that they were on very unfriendly terms. and the prisoner appeared to have made use of the expression that it would not be well for her to come within a mile of him, an answer to a letter she had written to him asking for money. The transaction that was the subject of inquiry took place on the evening of October the 30th last, and it appeared that the prisoner and the deceased were walking over London Bridge at that time, and it was alleged that at the moment a heavily laden dray was passing, the prisoner pushed the deceased under the wheel and she received serious injury. She was taken to hospital and her condition was considered so critical, but on the 16th of November the Lord Mayor attended at the hospital with Mr. Gore and took her dying deposition, and she lingered on until the 3rd of January when she died. It was alleged from the injuries she received from the dray, or at all events that her death was accelerated by those injuries. The prisoner seemed immediately after the affair to have expressed regret as to what had happened and to have represented that it was an accident, and he seemed to have returned to Yorkshire and resumed his acquaintance with the woman above mentioned. A warrant had been placed in the hands of one of the city officers for the apprehension of the prisoner upon a charge of causing the deceased grievous bodily harm, but it could not be executed and it was not known where he was. When, however, the deceased died, information was given to the police as to his whereabouts, but before the prisoner could be apprehended, it appeared that he came up to London with the woman he was cohabitating with, and he was taken into custody at King's Cross Station. He then declared that the offence was an accident and said that he had come up to London upon reading in the newspaper that his wife was dead, to consult a solicitor as to what was best for him to do. It appeared in the course of the case that the prisoner fell down as well as the deceased at the time that the occurrence took place, and that he was the person who first picked up his wife from the ground. It also appeared that the pavement was very slippy. The defence said that the unfortunate occurrence was an accident and that the prisoner had no intention to do the deceased injury. Words on paper and a verdict delivered. As the trial continued, the jury heard not just witness testimony but the prisoner's own words laid bare in a series of letters. Some were coldly transactional, offering to fund a cheap divorce if his wife declared herself a pauper. Others brimmed with bitterness, threatening to ruin her if she ever came near him again. And some, written to others, spoke of Anne with a contempt that could not easily be dismissed as grief or guilt. With the evidence now fully presented, Baron Cleasby addressed the jury. There was, he said, no clear proof that the accused had intended to use the dray to kill, thus ruling out a conviction of murder. But if the push was deliberate and led to death, then manslaughter must be considered. The jury withdrew. Moments later they returned with their decision. Guilty of manslaughter. The more serious charge of murder was set aside, but the question of punishment remained. Baron Cleasby would now decide what justice looked like. From the London Daily Chronicle, the 11th of April 1872. After hearing evidence in support of the indictment, letters written by the prisoner to the deceased were put in and read. In one of these he told her she should get a divorce from him for £5 by pleading pauperism, and he offered to pay the money and admit adultery. Cruelty, he says, she could not prove. And another letter, he threatened with her the consequence if she came within a mile of him. Much abuse was thrown on his wife in letters written to other persons. Mr. Poland and Mr. Williams having addressed the jury, Baron Cleasby summed up and said there was no evidence to show that the prisoner meant to kill the deceased by means of the dray, and that disposed of the charges of wilful murder. The jury, however, would decide whether the man pushed the woman with intent to cause her death, or whether he pushed her and accidentally caused her death. In the first case, it would be murder, and in the second, manslaughter. If, however, the fall of the woman was an accident, then the prisoner was in no way responsible. The jury, after a short deliberation, returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of manslaughter and acquitted the prisoner on the charge of murder. Baron Cleasby reserved sentence. Only a wife. And then came the sentence. After months of investigation, a public inquest, damning witness statements, and the victim's own dying words, James Pettingell, found guilty of pushing his wife beneath the wheels of a passing dray, was sentenced to just 3 months hard labour. No gallows, no life imprisonment, not even the maximum term allowed. As the penny illustrated paper noted with thinly veiled outrage, one might ask, had the victim been another man, a stranger on the street, might the gallows have awaited him? But she wasn't. She was his wife, and in the eyes of the law that seemed to make all the difference. It was, as the papers suggested, not only a case of injustice, but a reflection of the troubling belief that a husband's claim to his wife's made violence less criminal and even death less serious. From the penny illustrated paper of the 20th of April, James Pettingell had thrown his wife under the wheels of a passing dray, of the injuries caused by which she soon after died. A curious person might inquire if this was not murder, since it was in evidence that he had said he would do for her and had made previous attempts to throw her under carriage wheels, a possible motive being that, having taken up with a paramour, he felt a wife rather an encumbrance. Had his victim been a fellow man, Calcraft might have claimed him, but she was only his wife, a degree lower than being only a woman, and as she had thus prudently fulfilled that formula of vowing to cherish and protect which converts a woman into a man's private property, 3 months' hard labour was held to meet sufficiently the exigencies of the case. The poor fellow doubtless thought even this to be a very unappreciative acknowledgment of the kindness and humanity he claimed credit for having shown her. Further particulars. And now from the stark stone of London Bridge to the cobbled confusion of Mitcham. Our second case takes us away from murderous intent and into the realms of stubborn inebriation, misremembered violence, and one man's very vocal disagreement with the concept of consequences. It's a tale that left a constable limping, a magistrate sighing, and the accused deeply convinced he was the real victim. From the Illustrated Police News, 17th of August 1889, a magistrate on the evils of drink. At the Croydon Police Court on Saturday, Joseph Charles Homer, a middle-aged man of decent appearance, was charged on remand with being drunk and disorderly at the Broadway in Mitcham, assaulting Police Constable Bright in the execution of his duty and with wilfully damaging a cell. On Thursday, the prisoner and another man were fighting, and Bright ordered them away. They went, but the prisoner returned and entered the White Hart public house. The officer requested the barman on no account to serve him, as he had had sufficient, and Homer then came out, made use of bad expressions, and defied him or any other officer to remove him. Upon being arrested, he became very violent, kicked the constable twice on the shins, and threatened to ruin him for life. With the help of Cowley and another constable, Bright then got him to the station after much difficulty. When he was placed in the cell, the prisoner damaged the door and scraped out the mortar at the sides of the posts. It ultimately became necessary to take off his boots and remove him to another cell. The prisoner said he did not recollect striking or kicking the constable, but if he did so, he was very sorry. Dr. Alfred Carpenter said the prisoner's conduct was disreputable and highly dangerous. In his opinion, he had taken liquor that excited him, and he really did not know what he was about, but that was no defence. He knew the effect of the liquor, and by taking it, he was party to the condition he was in. He, the doctor, felt that by the evidence that if he, the defendant, went on in that way, he would undoubtedly get landed in a lunatic asylum. "We are proposing to be a friend to you," continued the chairman, "by keeping you away from the drink, and you will go to prison for a month with hard labour." The prisoner said he considered his sentence anything but just. And there we leave it. A brewer's dray, a dying declaration, and a sentence that might grievously be described as brief. Justice, like tea, was sometimes served lukewarm in 1872. If you've enjoyed this meander through the more dubious byways of Victorian morality, you can find many more such cases, along with early access, ad-free episodes, and the occasional scandal involving hatpins over on Patreon. It's frightfully respectable, and no one will sell you a subscription box of organic turnips. As always, thank you for your time, your interest, and your tolerance of our obsession with fog, footnotes, and fatal misunderstandings. See you next time, unless, of course, you're pushed under a dray, in which case, make it memorable. This has been News of the Times. I am Robin Coles, printing what others dare not whisper in letters large enough to scandalise the vicar.